take number 7. I'm all out of the scotch. I'm on to the ride. Yeah. The summer camp of 1980s slasher cinema. A time-tested microcosm for American society, stratified into classes. The campers, the owners. You have the counselors, of course. A simple story of a brutal killer lurking in the shadows, watching over them all and electing one misfortunate individual at a time for execution. But what is the assassin's raison d'etre? Who are the targets of their wrath? What, I ask, is the Weltanschauung exemplified by each of these summer camps? Death comes to the unjust in Camp Arawak in 1983's Sleepaway Camp. Any insult, threat, or petty act of cruelty perpetrated against protagonist Angela is reliably met with murder. Camp Arawak is a society governed by personal accountability and karmic balance.
Eat shit and die, Ricky!
Eat shit and live, Bill.
It expresses a profoundly optimistic outlook on the world, where no one is beyond the reach of avenging judgment, no matter their station. Counselors, cooks, campers, old and young, even the unscrupulous owner Mel himself, all are punished for their sins. It is a naive, childlike perspective, a projection by the murderer who is in fact a child. By contrast, the camps of 1981's The Burning, Camps Blackfoot and Stonewater, are emblematic of a bleak and uncaring cosmos. The protagonist, Cropsey, a world-weary, working-class groundskeeper, embarks upon a futile quest for justice after he is horrifically burned and disfigured by pranksters and hospitalized for 5 long years. His pain and suffering are minimized and dismissed by patronizing doctors, his anger castigated, his torturers absolved. Cropsey manages to murder various campers and counselors as stand-ins for those who victimized him, but notably Todd, the only one of the actual villains still encamped there, goes unrecognized by Cropsey and eludes his vengeance. Todd, with his young protege Alfred, viciously murders Cropsey and gratuitously burns his corpse, while co-opting his tragic story as a spooky campfire tale to scare and to scandalize the next generation of campers, enshrining and celebrating even the injustice as part of the camp's foundational lore. Camp Crystal Lake, from 1980's groundbreaking Friday the 13th and 1981's Friday the 13th, Part 2. It's said to be a place of doom. It's got a death curse, according to the man Ralph, insensitively dubbed Crazy Ralph for his superstitions. But his error is merely one of misattribution, you see. What he identifies as a curse upon the land is, in truth, an intrinsic component of the summer camp system. It is the camp counselors being haunted after all, epitomizing the class struggle inherent to a capitalist society. The counselors are scapegoated by the vengeful Mrs. Voorhees, who is a friend and peer of the camp's owners, the Christies. She hates these counselors because she blames two of them, long dead, for her son Jason's drowning back in 1957. An egregious fabrication. You see, Jason did not drown at all, as we learn in the sequel. So there was no reason for the mother's murder spree at all. But by the time that this becomes clear, there is a fresh justification for dead counselors. Jason now blames them for his mother's death at the hands of but one of them. You see, there will always be an excuse in the campfire lore of Camp Crystal Lake. The counselors deserve to die merely by virtue of their station. The police. The police are not there to protect the famously imperiled counselors. The police are there to serve capital, of course. They hassle the counselors. They persecute the impoverished Ralph for his Cassandra-like pronouncements. They enforce trespassing ordinances on behalf of the landowners. They unlawfully intrude upon the marginalized Jason's domicile. But they are friendly and deferential to the camp owners, Steve Christie in Part 1 and Paul Holt in Part 2. The counselors uproot their very lives only to be deliberately stranded at the camp. Only the owners have the freedom to come and to go as they please. When Alice, a talented artist who feels out of place and uncomfortable at the camp, expresses her desire to leave, Steve Christie, a sexual predator, convinces her to stay, and he tells her that if she is to leave, he will be the one to put her on the bus himself. He is in control. In Part 2, Paul Holt's assistant, Ted, orchestrates the theft of Jeff and Sandra's truck as a purported prank, but really to assert their boss's absolute control over their movements. Later, Paul and his cohorts commandeer the only two vehicles for a night of frivolous wassailing, robbing the remaining counselors of all transport, indeed of their very freedom to migrate. Cloistered in a cabin during a violent storm, Alice and her co-workers play a board game, Monopoly, correlating their predicament with the exploitative system of capitalism itself. They hate this game, the way that forces beyond their comprehension drive them around and around eternally, slowly and steadily draining them of their wealth and energies, with the only end state being their utter poverty. The wealth-hoarding winner ever unsatiated until they possess the very clothes off your back. Mind you, they are playing with variant rules, colloquially known as strip monopoly, and I've never played this precise variation myself. The sequel, Friday the 13th Part 2, opens with a child singing The Itsy Bitsy Spider, a parable wherein the titular diminutive arachnid struggles against Brobdingnagian elemental forces bent on flushing it into oblivion. It broaches the thematic Sisyphusian futility of the counselor's predicament, which has now been exacerbated. As we discussed previously, the first movie places the blame squarely upon the young workers of Camp Crystal Lake, of Camp Blood as it has come to be known. If only they were more reliable, more responsible, more subservient as a class, the system would treat them better. They would not be butchered all the time, perhaps. This new complement of counselors, as if in response to this very critique, attends a counselor training camp run by one Paul Holt to learn how to be better workers. But this training camp is just another summer camp on the same accursed lake as the aforementioned Camp Blood. It represents the same exploitation, manifested more clearly than ever before. This time around, the counselors themselves are being scammed into paying their overseers for the opportunity to be abused and murdered. Their economic prospects will not be improved by this so-called training. These trainees, all of them, have already been successful at finding employment as camp counselors. Camps are not going to pay them more after this very basic outdoor training. What does Paul Holt have to offer them? He has no special knowledge. He is a former co-worker to many of the trainees. They've worked at the same jobs as he. The training, by all indication, is a charade, a pretense. Paul is merely running a summer camp without the children and labeling it professional development. Leisure activities abound. Paul's second-in-command, Ted, is a puerile prankster. His other assistant, the protagonist Ginny, is pursuing an education in child psychology, a field that would actually be quite beneficial for aspiring camp counselors. But Paul repeatedly mocks and dismisses her expertise. Paul, you see, is a dimwit, his mediocrity belying the very notion of a meritocracy. Ginny beclowns him again and again. Upon checkmating him in a chess match, she christens him White Man to call attention to his advantages, both as first mover in the match and as a representative, to wit, a champion of the white patriarchy. He is left baffled by her triumph and by his defeat, befuddled by this implicit challenge to the established hierarchy. The murders begin immediately afterwards. "1981's Madman vividly anticipates the coming revolution. Its camp for gifted children is no summer camp at all, taking place in the autumn, the fall, in the face of a looming winter, the death of the current era. The film presents itself as a simple, quaint even, morality tale. Max, the owner of the camp, regales the campers with a spooky campfire story about a maniacal farmer, the titular Madman, who lurks in the forest, whose name, spoken above a whisper, rouses him to an unstoppable killing spree against all who might enter the woods alone. Willful camper Richie mockingly calls out this name. Mars, Madman Mars, and thereby initiates a bloodbath that claims the lives of all of the counselors, but not of Max, nor of young Richie. Now, what is the lesson of this parable? It's a very good question. First, for context, who are these so-called gifted children Max is addressing? I pose to you some simple arithmetic. There are 6 of these children, these campers. There are 7 adults working for Max, 6 counselors and the cook, Dippy. In addition to labor, there are certainly material costs of operating this camp. We must conclude that each child's parents are paying Max substantially more than he pays each of his employees. These children are not gifted, not beyond the privilege of being born into wealthy families. Thus, the moniker of their figurehead, Richie. Secondly, Max contributes nothing to the workings of the camp. Yet he is soon embarking on a winter-long vacation down south as soon as the camp concludes. The counselors, on the other hand, speak only of returning to their ordinary lives toiling in the big city. While the work is all done by the counselors, the profits, the fruits of that labor, are stolen in their entirety by Max, the owner. Within this context, we can interpret the story of Madman Mars as a symbolic recounting of a bourgeois revolution. Mars dwells in a large house on the outskirts of an agrarian town, violently terrorizing the smaller townsfolk. His image evokes that of a giant or of an ogre, a fairy tale stand-in for a tyrannical aristocrat. When Mars flaunts his escalating lawlessness and cruelty, the villagers band together to overthrow him, hang him from a tree, and chop off his face with his own axe, a symbol of power and upheaval. His lands falling into the hands of burgeoning capitalists like Max. Realistically, Mars is dead. Max surely knows this to be true. Therefore, the hulking monster that Max warns against is actually the specter of Mars's fate, the threat of a second revolution, this time of the proletariat. Max is admonishing the next generation of bourgeoisie to hang together against a workers' movement. Don't enter the woods alone. Don't speak the name Mars above a whisper. Don't raise the prospect of further revolution. Mars's axe, the revolutionary symbol, is currently lodged in a tree stump. The status quo seems safe for the time being.
I like to keep my staff happy, within reason, of course.
Max seeks to placate his employees with meaningless gestures. When Betsy raises concerns about scaring the younger children, Max agrees with her, and he portrays it as a significant concession to labor, when it is merely a benefit to the children of the wealthy. He dangles the prospect of more power and money to TP in the form of the $100 offer to free the axe, rife with its symbolism from the stump. He half-heartedly tries to assist TP, but it's only for show. He concludes the scene with a galling lecture to TP about the irrelevance of winning and the value of playing with a fair heart, ominously warning him against trying too hard to win. It is transparently disingenuous advice coming from the man at the top with all of the power. We learn how Max selectively exercises control over his employees' leisure time. The beer in the fridge is against his rules. This beer, it symbolizes community and camaraderie between the counselors. When Max learns of it, he co-opts that community. He lays claim to some of the beer in a gambit to portray himself as his employees' buddy, undermining their solidarity. By contrast, the cook, Dippy, has an obvious drinking problem, draining bottles of whiskey in plain view of the others. Max pays it no heed because Dippy's severe alcoholism serves only to isolate him from his co-workers. Dippy, seeking more liquor, is murdered prior to the staff appreciation meeting. His absence is never acknowledged, and he is entirely forgotten thereafter. Max, days before his long vacation, shirks his duties to go into town to gamble, leaving the counselors to pick up the slack. Crucially, TP is left feeling responsible for finding the missing Richie, who disappeared to explore the Mars house after Max goaded him. TP, first among many, enters the woods alone to find this missing child. The working class, exploited and devalued, are trained to sacrifice their own safety, indeed their very lives, at the whims of the upper class. Aside from Richie, the other children heard and assimilated Max's lesson. They hide Richie's disobedience from TP, even upon pain of torture. They showed no allegiance or respect to TP. He is a prole, you see. Later, after Betsy has secured the safety of the other children, they put up only the faintest protests to dissuade her from pursuing Madman Mars and meeting her certain death. Betsy, who repeatedly advocates for and professes her love for the youngest of the girls, receives no reciprocity because the children have no more use for her beyond serving as a sacrificial diversion to facilitate their own escape. The working class staff members exhibit no comparable solidarity. Max's coded lesson is not meant for them, and they miss his warning, needing something far more explicit, I suppose.
Beep boop, beep boop, beep boop.
They all die as a result, wandering into the woods alone, one by one. Repeatedly, counselors bemoan the difficulty of maintaining their relationships back in the city away from their employment at this camp. Dippy, the cook, spurns TP's plea for help with dislodging the revolutionary axe of power. 4 of the counselors commune with each other by the fireplace. Stacy, praises the fire built by Bill. Bill, contemplating this roaring fire, pontificates upon the beauty inherent in its destructiveness. Clearly, he is verging upon revolutionary ideation. Ellie, however, quickly extinguishes those thoughts, bluntly declaring that there can be no beauty in destruction, no matter the reason. No matter the reason! Dave rounds out this discussion, revealing his own apparent takeaway from the Madman Mars legend, that no mind can truly know another. No genuine connection is possible between humans. He could easily behead all of these other counselors, hiding their corpses where they would never be found. And they are none the wiser. They have no suspicion of these potentialities. They don't know. I'm rambling here. And though the scene culminates in a spontaneous tickle pile, his point has been made. There can be no amount of trust within this group. They have been convinced that they are and will remain alone. They are reconciled to their disunity. This is Max's doing, you understand here. Max knows his history. He sees the coming shift in seasons. He feels it in his bones. He knows the status quo is unsustainable. He uses his power and his status to set the stage so that, when the revolutionary axe is dislodged and claimed by the kings of a new era, it is wielded on behalf of his class, the capitalists, the bourgeoisie. And it is so. The wealthy children escape unscathed at the expense of Betsy and the other counselors. Max returns to find a shaken Richie, awoken to a new world and his place within it. The proletariat is all dead, their corpses burning in the basement of a decrepit old farmhouse, sacrificed and discarded. The workers' revolution is cancelled. Perhaps next year, I suppose.